Hey there folks, how you doing today? Hope all is going well for you. Happy Labor Day for those of you that got to enjoy it with your families. Good deal. That being said, keep in mind there is some racket going on back there. Life is happening as we speak. That's not going to change anytime soon. We're just going to roll with it. So this is part 2 of a video series that we started last month with this pistol, the Smith & Wesson M&P 10mm. I have that pistol right here for you folks. Let me show you real quick. We do have a safe and empty weapon here. You'll notice that is an empty magazine. No ammunition out here in the immediate area, and it's going to stay that way for the remainder of this portion of the content. Check it twice. So for those of you that saw part 1 of the video series of this, you know that I took it out to the range, and at 25 yards off of a rest, well, our groups just weren't good. They were about that big, and I had given the lame excuse that I thought the red center bullseye on the targets was interfering with the red dot and was causing kind of an optical illusion for me, and I couldn't see it real well. That being said, I made up a new target and I took it out to the range today so that we could test the ammunition for group size and velocity and a few other things, and this is what we came up with. For the chronograph portion of this content, I utilized an old Delta model shooting crony that was given to me by an old man named Volkswagen Bill in Alamogordo, New Mexico, probably close to 20 years ago. I haven't lived there in 16 years, so it had to have been more than 16 years ago. But it also wasn't the last thing I did before I left there. So suffice it to say, long time ago, I received this shooting crony in a state of disrepair. It did not work. I took it apart. I found where probably it got dropped or something, and a couple of solder joints had come loose, so I fixed them.
Good luck. Yeah, she's been a great ride, man. It works! Slow battle!
I dusted it off, took it out to the range with me, and this is what I found out. So bear with me while we go through this next portion. I do have everything written down. I'm going to try to call it from memory. So if by chance the numbers on the screen don't match the numbers that I said, I'm sorry in advance. I'll try to correct it with the final editing portion of this video. For starters, our MagTech 180 grain full metal jackets, which was the very first ammunition that we fired through this pistol, produced an average velocity of 1120 feet per second, which is a little bit anemic for a 10mm auto. The next ammunition that we fired through our chronograph was the Sauer 10mm 180 grain full metal jacket, which has an advertised velocity of 1250 feet per second. That doesn't say how long the test barrel was. I'm assuming it would have had to be longer than the 4.6 inch barrel on our Smith & Wesson M&P, because our average velocity with that round was only 1168 feet per second, well below the advertised velocity of 1250 feet per second. The next load that we ran through our chronograph was our Hornady XTP 155 grain hollow point that we hand loaded for this pistol using data from this book that I cannot share with you on here because the Thought Police will shut me down and give me a channel strike if I share load data with you. Now the nice thing about the data that we used was it was specifically designed for the Hornady XTP bullet. The data that I used indicated that a light load would be somewhere in the area of about 1150 feet per second and a hot load would be around 1290. We achieved an average velocity of 1190 using a middle of the road load right out of this book. So that was pretty consistent and accurate. I was hoping for 1200 feet per second. 1190 is not much short of that. We actually did have a couple of rounds that exceeded the 1200 mark, but the average was 1190. Moving on to our Barnes Vortex 155 grain TAC XP hollow point bullet. It's a solid copper bullet, I believe. That one showed published data of 1150 feet per second. That is the only round that we shot through the chronograph today that exceeded published velocities. We got an average of 1173 out of that load. As some of you may recall, last time we had this pistol out, the best group we shot was with that Barnes Vortex round, and it did not disappoint today either. In fact, there was a little bit of an Easter egg on the target when we did that one. I'll show you here in a minute. Moving right along, our Underwood Extreme Penetrator 140 grain solid copper external hollow point Phillips screwdriver looking projectile, which is box rated to 1500 feet per second, performed at about 1460 feet per second. So again, not bad. It was definitely hot, but it just didn't quite live up to the markings on the box. The final load that we ran through the chronograph today was the double tap 200 grain controlled expansion jacketed hollow point. These are the hunting round that I bought on the recommendation of a good friend of mine. These little guys are expensive, they're hard to come by, and they make a lot of claims. Now, I have heard from many other sources that the velocities published by Double Tap are generally pretty consistent with what you actually get. That being said, there is a bit of a caveat on this one. I'll zoom in here in just a second. You can see here that this 200 grain controlled expansion jacketed hollow point is rated from Double Tap at 1250 feet per second from a 5-inch barrel. We did not achieve 1250 feet per second with this ammunition. Granted, we do not have a 5-inch barrel. We have a 4.6-inch barrel, so we gave up 0.4 of 1 inch worth of velocity. The average group that we shot with the Double Tap ammunition today was 1,083 feet per second. That is 167 feet per second slower than published data. I cannot say for certain, but I really do not think we gave up 167 feet per second with 0.4 of 1 inch. So the targets that we used for the distance shooting today were just Dirty Bird targets with a red bullseye that I sharpied out to be a black dot instead of a red dot, so that there would be some contrast between the bullseye and the red dot on the pistol. I really think that helped. The groups were way better. I did not shoot these from a bench, rather I shot them off of my little fishing stool. Some of them I used a shooting stick to support my hand with, others I just set my elbows on my knees. The groups were all really good in size, and the difference between the best group we shot and the worst group that we got was less than half. So aside from learning that I would probably have a pretty good stance sitting on a commode, I also learned that I can probably just leave my shooting stick at home when I go out on this pig hunt, because there was a negligible difference in the size of the groups fired, whether or not I was using the shooting stick. So for starters, to that guy that said my group size sucked, he's probably still right. So the largest group of the day was also the group that was most centered at 25 yards, which there's no surprise there because it is the load that I used to zero the pistol, and that was my hand load. Our 25-yard group with that 155 grain Hornady XTP round was 1.46 inches, which just was not bad. I pulled one of them a little bit. I felt it just as soon as I pulled it, and that was one of the reasons I gave up the shooting stick, because it just felt awkward on my wrist. The very best group that I shot was with the Underwood Extreme Penetrator 140 grain bullets, and I think we stacked all three of them in there at 0.8 of 1 inch. The Easter egg group was the Barnes Vortex group. I shot the first 2 rounds, and then I shot the 3rd round, and I sat there at 25 yards trying to see it on paper, and I couldn't see it. So then I started looking around on the grand scope of the target, trying to figure out where I pulled that round to, and it wasn't there. So I went ahead and loaded a fourth round and fired it, and it opened up the group size just a little bit. But then when I went back and I was reviewing the footage from the camera later, I saw right where that third round went. We had a really good group. It was over 1 inch, but just barely 1.1 inch, and 2 of them were in the exact same hole. So the only other group that received a sub 1 inch group was the double tap 200 grain controlled expansion jacketed hollow point. We kept that one at 0.99. It was ever so close to being a 1 inch group. Really, really good. I'm just very disappointed with the overall velocity that I saw. The friend of mine that suggested these bullets to me uses a Glock Model 40 MOS, which has a longer barrel. I'm going to talk to him about some chronograph testing to see if we are actually getting published velocities with the longer barrel of his Glock Model 40. The very best thing we have to take away from this was at 25 yards, every round we fired functioned reliably, and also all of the rounds would have been acceptable and humane kill shots at the distance we were shooting. So there was not enough variance in point of impact between any of the rounds that would make me want to go and re-zero the pistol in between changing ammunitions. Hopefully you enjoyed this content today. I have to go light the barbecue grill, so I'm gonna hang it up for now, but until next time, take care, folks. God bless. And there was a couple of you that were like, yeah, you know what? I've seen that happen before. There were a couple of you that sent hate mail and said, you suck, that's all there is to it. Let me try this in English. Moving on to our Barnes Vortex 155 grain cut.